You know, there's something inherently satisfying in bowling when you roll a strike. There's that moment when the ball first leaves your hand and you have that instinct or that feeling like, oh wow, this could be really good. And then as the ball continues its journey down the lane, the alignment falls into place and boom, you hit that pocket between the number 1 and the number 3 pin, or the 1 and 2 pin, depending upon whether you bowl right-handed or left-handed. And part of what's satisfying about it is that the impact is immediate. You hear the crack of the ball like a small thunder crack or thunderclap as the ball impacts those first pins, and then boom, the pins go flying everywhere. And you can see the results of what in essence in that particular game is a perfect roll. Now there's a flip side to what seems like a perfect roll, and that is that as the ball makes its journey down the lane, if your alignment is even an inch or two off and that ball doesn't align with that pocket exactly right, the results can be radically different. Instead of having a strike or rolling a strike, you can end up with a 7-10 split, which is one pin on the back row on the far left and the other pin on the back row on the far right. And that's a really difficult situation to come back from. The lesson for our leadership is the same. We may go through all the motions. We might be intentional about how we manage our time and what we invest in. But if our alignment is not quite correct, then the difference in our impact can be radically different. So today, as we move from the 2-minute tips segment that I've been working with you on over the last 4 to 6 weeks to this new Raise the Bar segment, I'm going to summarize the last few weeks of our time together, and I've put together a 5-step process for aligning yourself and ensuring that over time you can take consistent steps toward maximizing your impact as a leader. So let's jump right on in. Now, the first step in this process is to ask yourself the one question that we talked about several weeks back, and that question is, what is essential? And in this context, the question is, what are the essential outputs in my current role? And before we unpack that a little bit, let's jump into this idea of essential. So take a look at this slide and let's talk about the definitions that are there. So the first definition on the screen is something that is fundamentally important or necessary. And another word for that can be indispensable. The second part of that definition, which is equally important and which I think is something that we often overlook, is being part of the nature or essence of something, or something that is inherent. Now, the first definition speaks more of what we do for a living. And in today's culture, a lot of the emphasis gets put on that. You know, it's more about what you do for me rather than who you are on the inside. But the second part of the definition of essential is who we are as humans. You know, what gifts do we have and what are our skills and abilities that perhaps based on our stories or our life history, nobody else may be able to do as effectively as us. Now, I'd like to touch on one other point before we actually go through the individual steps, and take a look at this slide, which is how I define impact. So impact combines what's essential, or what we just discussed rather, as being indispensable, what you do for a living, and then inherent, who you are as a person. And then you combine that with the alignment idea, which is aligning your time and your gifts and the resources that you have. And if you can successfully integrate or multiplex those as your life progresses, you'll find that your impact goes significantly up. Combining those two elements is a huge multiplier for you as a leader. So don't overlook that process. Now, let's dive right into the individual steps, and I'll just give you a few comments and thoughts on those as we wind down the video for today. So number one of what I'm calling the impact process, step one, as we said, is to ask the one question. What are the essential outputs for you and your current role? And this is absolutely important. Don't list any more than 5. I know a lot of people that I've worked with in the past come back and say, okay, I've got 25 top priorities, and No single human can deal with 25 top priorities. You're just setting yourself up for failure. So keep in mind, above all else, that this is a heart and soul exercise. It's designed to be reflective, not a check it off the list, move on to the next thing. So many of us as leaders have such busy schedules with work, family, outside activities that it's hard to carve out time to actually think through who we are and what we do and how we can have the most impact. So I'll just encourage you to take this seriously and just give this some time to percolate or soak in. I can also tell you that having talked with a number of people about this over the last 2 years, this is not necessarily a natural process. So the important thing, even if it feels weird or a little bit funky, the important thing is to just get started. And I think success builds on success. Now let's move on to step 2. Once you've identified the 3 to 5 outputs, then transfer those to your strategic lanes chart, which we talked about a couple weeks back. And remember that your lanes go from, top to bottom down the left-hand side of your racetrack chart, and the timeline goes across the top. And as I mentioned a few weeks back, I suggest starting out with a 12-month timeline, but any timeline is fine. Just depends on your schedule and what you have going on in your life. Once you've transferred those outputs to your chart, then the third step is to track your time for 30 days. And the reason I suggest 30 days is that a month tends to be a pretty good baseline. Most of us have weekly routines or rhythms, we have monthly routines or rhythms, and then we also have quarterly and even annual routines or rhythms. But when it comes to focusing and trying to improve your time allocation for the items that are most important, a month serves as a great baseline. And the other rule of thumb here is don't overcomplicate this. Again, this is not something that you want to make really difficult. This is a high level, high altitude overview. And as time goes on and you get more comfortable with the process, you can drill in on it and spend a little bit more time, maybe refining it. Okay, once you've done that, then let's move right into step 4. And this is what I call a personal movement plan. You want to develop specific steps to move from the current percentage to the desired percentage. And as I mentioned before, I'm working with somebody right now, and once he tracked his time, he found out that he was only spending about 25% of his time on his essential items. So by brainstorming this and going through some lists over the last couple weeks, we came up with about 5 or 6 things that represented, quote, low-hanging fruit, so that he could move from a current reality of 25% to 40% in the first 3 months. Now, your results might vary and your timeline might vary. So again, the important thing is to identify it. Don't be discouraged by where you are. If you're at 10%, that's fine. Just deal with the 10% and start to put a plan together to increase that time allocation. Now, there's no right percentage here. So with this gentleman that I'm working with, we set a goal as 90%. And that also happens to be my personal goal for my own time allocation, my strategic lanes. But your job and your life may be different. So reality for you may be that if you're spending 50 to 60% on these essential outputs, then you're doing really well. So don't lock yourself into a goal. Just pick a goal and then take some steps to move toward that goal. And then the final step in the process is to practice relentless selectivity on all of your time investments moving forward. And remember, we talked about Lexus a while back and how when they came to the market in 1989, their initial tagline was the relentless pursuit of perfection. And for leaders, that becomes the relentless pursuit of selection. So every single decision, every single thing that comes across your path should be evaluated in light of the strategic lanes that you have identified. And your yeses and your nos need to start being built around that so that you can, again, move toward maximum impact over time. And the final thought, which is very important that I'll leave you with, is that, as we're working on one of our lanes, it's pretty common to run into a speed bump or a roadblock. So the other thing I would really encourage you to do is to spend time planning out your next steps for all 5 of your lanes, assuming that you have 5. So that way, when you bump into a roadblock or hit a speed bump in one lane, you can instantly transfer lanes and start working on another high impact item. If you don't do that, then what tends to happen is you default to something that is comfortable for you. So you just take care of some emails, or you make a phone call, or you do something that gives you immediate emotional payoff, but may not be of long-term strategic benefit. So the more time, again, that you can spend on those lanes by intelligently moving between them, that becomes another great tool in your leadership toolkit to help you stay on track. All right, so just to put a wrap or a summary on what we've talked about today, we roll strikes in bowling when we consistently do 2 things. The first thing is to be bowling in the right lane, and that sounds maybe silly or simple, but that is absolutely essential for our success. The second thing, and the second way that we roll strikes, is to make sure that the bowling ball is aligned properly with the pins. And when it is, and that impact hits in the right slot, as we talked about a little bit earlier in the video, then all the pins go down and you can avoid rolling a 7-10 split. So I would really encourage you this coming week to lean into this process. Treat it, as I said, like a heart process and not just another goal or another thing to check off the list, because I believe that if you do that, and if you start practicing this over time, that, man, you're just going to make a huge difference in the effectiveness of your leadership. So see you next week. Next week we're going to be talking a little bit about craftsmanship and the idea of leaders actually being craftsmen, which I think you'll find to be interesting. So have a great week, and I will see you next Thursday.